Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everybody. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. I got to say, I've been on the committee now for 14 years, and this year's assessment is clearly one of the most complicated and challenging in my tenure on the committee. And I want to get into that in a moment, but I want to first of all address the recent story that has broken in the news. Yesterday, we stunningly learned that senior members of this administration, and according to reports, two of our witnesses here today were members of a group chat that discussed highly sensitive and likely classified information that supposedly even included weapons packages, targets, and timing, and included the name of an active CIA agent. Putting aside for a moment that classified information should never be discussed over an unclassified system, it's also just mind-boggling to me that all these senior folks were on this line and nobody bothered to even check Security Hygiene 101. Who are all the names? Who are they? Well, it apparently included a journalist. And no matter how much the Secretary of Defense or others want to disparage him, this journalist had at least the ethics to not report, I think, everything he heard. Question I raise is like, everybody on this committee gets briefed on security protocols. We're told you don't make calls outside of SCIFs of this kind of classified nature. We don't know, and I'm going to ask, obviously. Director Gabbard is the executive in charge of all, keeping our secrets safe. Were these government devices? Were they personal devices? Have the devices been collected to make sure there's no malware? There's plenty of declassified information that shows that our adversaries, China and Russia, are trying to break in to encrypted systems like Signal. I can just say this, if this was the case of a military officer or an intelligence officer and they had this kind of behavior, they would be fired. I think this is one more example of the kind of sloppy, careless, incompetent behavior, particularly towards classified information, that this is not a one-off or a first-time error. You take your extra 13 seconds, but I'm going to go back to what I addressed at the outset. I mean, this was not only sloppy, it not only violated all procedures, but if this information had gotten out, American lives could have been lost. The Houthis had this information, could reposition their defensive systems. So I want to get a little more information about this. Director Gabbard, did you participate in the group chat with Secretary of Defense and other Trump senior officials discussing the Yemen war plans?
Senator, I don't want to get into the specifics.
Ma'am, were you on? You're not going to be willing to address. So you're not, are you denying, Matt, will you answer my question, ma'am? You were not TG on this group chat?
I'm not going to get into the specifics.
So you refuse to acknowledge whether you were on this group chat?
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Why are you going to get into the specifics? Is it because it's all classified?
Because this is currently under review by the National Security
Because
Council.
it's all classified? If it's not classified, share the text now.
As the White House previously
Is it classified
stated,
or non-classified information on this text?
I can confirm.
Director Radcliffe, were you on the group chat?
Senator, I was on a Signal messaging group.
So you were the John Ratcliffe on that chat?
I was.
Thank you, thank you.
Can I provide some context, Senator, to that?
Yes, but I've got a series of questions.
Well, but I think it's important because at the outset you made a couple of comments about Signal messaging using encrypted apps. So that we're clear, one of the first things that happened when I was confirmed as CIA director was Signal was loaded onto my computer at the CIA, as it is for most CIA officers. One of the things that I was briefed on very early, Senator, was by the CIA records management folks about the use of Signal as a permissible work use. It is. That is a practice that preceded the current administration to the Biden administration.
Director Radcliffe, I've got a series of questions. If you're making the statement, if you're making the statement, the Signal is a secure channel.
No, can I answer that? It is.
I've got a series of
end-to-end decryption. So
It is.
to finish,
I understand encryption.
it is permissible to use to communicate and coordinate for work purposes, provided, Senator, that any decisions that are made are also recorded through formal channels.
Right.
So those were procedures that were implemented. My staff implemented those processes, followed those processes, complied with those processes, and finally, just please, so my communications, to be clear, in a Signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
Well, we will make that determination, because if it's not classified, share the text with the committee. You know, let me go on. Director Gabbard, you are the security executive and set access guidelines for classified information. Did you contact the defense secretary or others after this specific military planning was put out and say, hey, we should be doing this in a SCIF?
There was no classified material that was shared in that
So then
Signal
if there was no
check.
classified material, share it with the committee. You can't have it both ways. These are important jobs. This is our national security. Bobbing and weaving and trying to, filibuster your answer. So please answer the question. If this was Director Gabbard, if this was a rank and file intelligence officer who did this kind of careless behavior, what would you do with them?
Senator, I'll reiterate that there was no classified material that was shared in that
And if there's no classified materials, share. And then if there's no classified materials, then you can't even answer the question whether you're on the chat. This is strangely familiar, and I think my colleagues will remember, when you couldn't answer the question, is Edward Snowden a traitor? Man, I have serious doubts about anyway.
Thank you, Director Radcliffe. Do you agree, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said this morning when asked by members of the press what had happened, he said this morning in Hawaii that Atlantic Editor-in-Chief Jeff Goldberg is a, quote, deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of providing hoaxes time and time again. Do you share that evaluation, the Secretary of Defense's evaluation of Jeff Goldberg as a journalist?
Senator, I didn't see those comments. I don't know Jeff Goldberg.
So do you share that view of the Secretary of Defense?
Well, I don't have a view on.
Okay. Assuming that he has that view, I'm curious about whether you are the CIA director. Okay, this has happened. We know it's happened. Did Jeff Goldberg somehow, did he create a hoax that allowed him to become part of this Signal thread? Please answer the question. You don't insult the intelligence of the American people. Did he invite himself to the Signal thread?
I don't know how he was invited, but clearly he was added.
Clearly it was. Finish your sentence, please.
Clearly he was added to the Signal group. Your question is.
You don't know that the president's national security advisor invited him to join the Signal thread? Everybody in America knows that. Does the CIA director not know that?
I've seen conflicting reports about who added the reporter to the Signal messaging group.
You think that it's perfectly appropriate that there was a reporter added, especially one that the Secretary of Defense says is deceitful, highly discredited, a so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes over and over again? Is your testimony that it was appropriate that he was added to this Signal thread?
No, of course not. And
why did you not call?
Hold on, Senator. You're mischaracterizing my testimony.
Good. You answered the question. Let me ask you. When he was added to the thread, you're the CIA director. Why didn't you call out that he was present on the Signal thread.
I don't know if you use Signal messaging app.
I do. Not for classified information, not for targeting,
Well, neither
not
do I,
for
Senator.
anything remote.
Neither do I, Senator.
Well,
To
that's
be
what
clear,
your testimony is today.
It absolutely is not, Senator. Were you
No,
not
I'm saying
listening
your
at the beginning?
No,
When I said that I was using it as permitted, it is permissible to use.
I agree that's your testimony.
Yeah.
I agree that's your testimony. You asked me if I use it, and I said not for targeting, not for classified information.
And I said I don't either.
I also know Jeff Goldberg. I don't use it to communicate with him, but you thought it was appropriate. By the way, I think he's one of the more outstanding journalists in America, but I'm shocked to find him on a thread that he's reading in the parking lot of a grocery store in Washington, D.C., and your testimony as the director of the CIA is that it's totally appropriate. Is it appropriate that the
Director,
president?
that is not what I.
Okay,
when did
go
I say
ahead,
it was?
please.
When did I use the word appropriate?
Well, go ahead, please.
Well, I didn't.
That everybody in America.
So clearly,
there's nothing to
Senator,
see here is what your testimony is.
No, I never said
This
that.
is just a normal day at the CIA where we chat about this kind of stuff over Signal. In fact, it's so normal that the last administration left it here for us. That's your testimony today.
That's your testimony.
No, that's
Senator.
not my testimony. That's what you said.
I didn't say any of those things that you just related, Senator.
I heard you say it. We'll let the American people decide. Let me
Well, I
ask
think
you
you've-
one
you've
final point. I'm out of
mischaracterized
time.
it. Well, are you going to give me a chance
Is it
to?
appropriate? Did you know that the president's Middle East advisor was in Moscow on this thread while you were, as director of the CIA, participating in this thread? Were you aware of that? Are you aware of that today?
I'm not aware of that
This
today.
sloppiness, this incompetence, this disrespect for our intelligence agencies and the personnel who work for them is entirely unacceptable. It's an embarrassment.
Senator,
You need to do better. You need to do better.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to come back to the topic of the day here, the signal chain as reported by The Atlantic. Ms. Gabbard and Mr. Ratcliffe, you each testified that there was no information operational in nature, no classified information. So I want to ask each of you just a series of, just respond yes or no. I'll start with Ms. Gabbard. In the signal chain that we have been talking about, was there any mention of a target in Yemen?
I don't remember mention of specific targets.
Any generic target?
I believe there was discussion around targets in general.
Mr. Ratcliffe?
I think that's consistent with my recollection. Again, I don't have access to that. But
Was there any mention, Ms. Gabbard, of a weapon or weapons system?
I don't recall specific weapons systems being named.
I'm not talking about specific, any weapon or weapons system.
I don't recall specific names of systems or weapons being used or named within the
Well, I'm
chat.
not asking whether, I don't want you to tell me what the specific weapon was, but any weapon at all. Mr. Ratcliffe, same question.
I don't recall.
How about anything about timing? Ms. Gabbard?
I don't recall specific timing.
Was there any
I
mention?
won't get into the detail of the conversation, but obviously there was a significant amount of planning and internal discussions that had occurred prior to and outside of this Signal chat.
Mr. Ratcliffe, you're nodding your head. Any mention of any military unit whatsoever? Mr. Ratcliffe?
Not that I recall.
Ms. Gabbard?
Not that I recall.
Okay, so I understand that DoD policy prohibits discussion of even what is called controlled unclassified information, or CUI, on unsecured devices. Are both of you aware of that DoD policy?
I haven't read that policy.
Not familiar with the DoD policy, but I would say that the Secretary of Defense is the original classification authority for DoD in deciding what would be classified information.
Ms. Gabbard, does the intelligence community have a policy that prohibits discussion of controlled, unclassified information?
Yes.
It does. Okay. Controlled, unclassified information, according to DoD, includes information that is information that has not been approved for public release. Would you, of what's been disclosed publicly of the Signal chain, would either of you feel that that would be approved for public release? Ms. Gabbard.
The discussion that took place in that Signal chat group was a conversation reflecting national security leaders and the vice president around the president's objectives.
So yes or no, would you approve that for public release?
I don't feel I can answer that question here.
Because of the nature of this hearing?
Because of the nature of a private discussion that took place between individual leaders in our government.
It would make sense that you would not approve it for public release, wouldn't it?
There are other factors that would go into that consideration.
Mr. Ratcliffe, yes or no?
I wouldn't approve the release of classified information. Again, as I've said, my
I'm not talking about
understanding is
classified information, Mr. Ratcliffe. I'm talking about information that has not been approved for public release. That is information that is considered controlled, unclassified information.
The principles that would have been on that would have been individuals capable of approving that for public release.
I got 20 seconds. The deliberation as to whether or not we should launch a strike on another country, would you consider that classified information, Ms. Gabbard?
Well, the information was not classified.
I'm not talking about this. I'm just talking about deliberation from principles as to whether or not we should launch a strike on another country. Would you consider that classified information? I'm not talking about what happened this week.
There are other factors that would go into determining that classification.
Mr. Ratcliffe, the deliberation between principals in our national security apparatus about whether or not to strike another country, would you consider that to be classified information?
Pre-decisional strike deliberation should be conducted through classified channels.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director Gabbard, were you overseas during any parts of these discussions?
Yes, Senator, I was.
Were you using your private phone or a public phone for the Signal discussions?
I won't speak to this because it's under review by the National Security Council. Once that review is complete, I'm sure we'll share the results with the committee.
What is under review? It's a very simple question. Are you your private phone or an officially issued phone? What could be under review?
National Security Council is reviewing all aspects of how this came to be, how the journalist was inadvertently added to the group chat, and what occurred within that chat across the board.
But so you were not going to disclose anything about whether you use the phone. Director Ratcliffe, there's been indication that the CIA has warned recently retired personnel about the vulnerabilities of Signal and other encrypted messaging applications. If that's the case, why were you discussing these issues on Signal?
Senator, Signal use, as I've said repeatedly, is permissible for work purposes. I've never said that end-to-end encryption apps like Signal are a substitute for classified systems, and I was not discussing classified information in this setting.
But as you've indicated previously, perhaps the Secretary of Defense was discussing classified information, and only he can be held accountable in terms of whether it was classified or declassified at the point when he spoke. Is that accurate?
Well, I didn't say it that way. I said the Secretary of Defense is the original classification authority, and my understanding is that his comments are that any information that he shared was not classified.
But you have no way to verify that.
I don't.
Again, this is a very troubling example and a great lapse in our intelligence and our discussion. One further point, if you are not aware of any classified information on the discussions back and forth, would it be appropriate for the author to release the entire text of what he heard or transcribed?
I think the author has released, my understanding, essentially almost all of the information as it's been related to me. I don't know what calculation the author made with regard to what information would be released or not.
Well, he
but again, I can again confirm that with respect to the communications that were related, as to me, there was no classified information.
According to the article, quote, the message contained information that might be interpreted as related to actual and current intelligence operations, and the author did not disclose that information. So the question would be, if he disclosed everything he heard, in your view.
That wouldn't be classified information. I know the context of what that is, and I think the author said might be interpreted as related to intelligence information. It was not classified information.
So it goes back to my point. If he released all this information he did not release, he could do so without any liability at the federal level.
I think you're asking for a legal answer that I'm not able to give you, but.
Mr. Patel, can you opine? You're a lawyer and you're the director of the FBI. Would he face any legal liability if he released the information?
Because of the questions you and the Vice Chairman have put to me, I'm not going to prejudge the situation, and that legal call is ultimately for the Department of Justice.